My husband won the house in the divorce. He called it fair, said I should be grateful he let me go easy. He even threw a party the night I moved out. I didn't argue. I didn't say a word. I just packed my things and left. But not everything was his to keep. Some things stay quiet until they don't. Don't rush to judge. Let the full story unfold, then tell me how it made you feel. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because some betrayals deserve to be heard. Camille Ellison had once believed in foundations, the kind you build with trust, patience, and just enough sacrifice. 10 years ago, she stood barefoot in the empty lot behind her parents' old cabin, watching Griffin sketch blueprints in the dirt with a stick. He wasn't an architect, just a man with ambition and a mouthful of promises. And Camille back then believed in every one of them. They were fresh out of college. Camille had inherited the land after her father passed 5 acres of wooded serenity just outside Ashbourne, Oregon. It wasn't much, but to Griffin it was potential. "This is where we'll raise our kids," he said. "This is where we'll build everything." Camille had always been more grounded. She'd dreamed of opening a community literacy center. Griffin wanted more clients, connections, corner offices. So, when he suggested using her land as leverage for a business loan, Camille hesitated, but signed. In those early years, it felt like love. Griffin worked 16-hour days launching his brand consulting firm, and Camille supported him without complaint. She cooked, she cleaned, she raised their daughter Tessa while managing the books for his startup from home. She even gave up a grant she'd won for her non-profit work because Griffin needed the cash buffer. "It's just until we're stable," he told her. "Then it's your turn." But her turn never came. The higher Griffin climbed, the more Camille disappeared in the background. His new friends were lawyers, executives, influencers. Camille didn't fit. She wore thrifted cardigans, preferred tea over cocktails, and stayed home most nights reading. At first he teased her gently. Then came the passive-aggressive jokes at dinner parties, the missed calls, the canceled plans, the late nights that became normal. Camille never asked for much. Not gifts, not praise, just honesty. But even that, she realized, had become too expensive for him to give. She found the first receipt by accident, a boutique hotel in Portland, charges for 2. During a week he claimed to be in Seattle. She didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she waited, observed. A perfume she didn't wear on his shirt collar. A strand of hair in the passenger seat of his car. Texts he swiped away too quickly. There was a woman, that much was clear. Her name was Riley Voss, 27. Social media strategist. Pretty in a curated kind of way, all filters and angles. Camille had never met her in person, but she could recognize the tone in Griffin's voice when he spoke of his new hire. Too eager, too careful. When Camille finally confronted him, Griffin didn't deny it. He didn't apologize either. He just shrugged as if infidelity was a byproduct of ambition. "You're too comfortable, Camille," he said. "You don't push me anymore." Riley challenges me. That night, Camille didn't cry. She didn't scream. She made dinner, read a bedtime story to Tessa, and lay awake listening to the ceiling fan tick like a countdown. 2 months later, he filed for divorce. The proceedings were brutal. Griffin came armed with a ruthless lawyer and years of financial manipulation. The house was technically in his name, a transfer they'd made during refinancing. The business, also his, even though Camille had helped build it from day one. He even disputed joint custody of Tessa, suggesting Camille's emotional state made her unfit for full weeks. Camille didn't have the same kind of legal firepower. What she had was a quiet, steel composure, and Naomi Pierce, a sharp, resourceful attorney, referred by her old college roommate. Naomi was the one who caught the detail that changed everything, the land itself. It had never been transferred, never touched. Still in Camille's name. Still hers. Naomi pulled her aside after one of the hearings. "Let him have the house," she said. "Let him celebrate. Just don't remind him what it's standing on." Camille signed the final agreement a week later. She let go of the house. let go of the furniture, the garden she'd spent 5 summers building, even the custom kitchen island she adored. Griffin took it all thinking he'd won. Camille left with a single folder. Inside, the original deed to the land. Untouched. Unchallenged. And for a while, she did nothing. She moved into a small rental 2 towns over. Picked up freelance work editing grant proposals. Spent weekends with Tessa teaching her how to bake cinnamon rolls from scratch. Her phone buzzed constantly with photos of Riley and Griffin's new dream home, courtesy of mutual friends, and Griffin's own social media. She never responded, never commented, but she watched, and she waited, because some roots run deeper than they look. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Griffin threw a party. He called it a fresh start. Invitations were sent out digitally with a photo of him, and Riley posed in front of the newly painted house. Camille recognized the front door she'd chosen, that shade of deep blue, after researching the psychology of color for weeks. It was supposed to feel like safety. Now it was a backdrop for toasts. Camille wasn't invited, of course. But she saw everything. Friends she once had coffee with now smiled in Riley's stories, captioned with things like, "To growth," and "When the past lets go, the future begins." The house looked almost unfamiliar. Griffin had repainted the porch, replaced the curtains, and removed all signs that Camille had ever lived there. Even the climbing roses she'd nurtured for years had been torn out. That night, Camille sat in silence, sipping chamomile tea as her daughter slept in the next room. The walls of her rental were thin, the kitchen barely big enough for a toaster and a cutting board. But it was quiet. It was hers, and she still had the land. At the party, Griffin was in his element, surrounded by former colleagues, brand partners, and a handful of family members who had always preferred his version of the truth. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, laughed too loudly, and held Riley close, a living billboard for success. "What a win, man," someone said, clinking glasses. "New chapter." Griffin smirked. "Got rid of the dead weight and kept the assets." Riley laughed like it was charming. Her hand was on his chest, her eyes scanning the room. The two of them looked like a real estate ad, polished, curated, almost believable. What no one asked, and Griffin never thought to mention, was where the house began and where it ended. Naomi Pierce had warned Camille, don't stir the waters too early. Let him get comfortable. Let him forget. And Griffin did. He moved Riley in. He renovated. He even applied for a home equity line of credit, thinking the property would support it. When the bank asked for documentation, Griffin submitted everything, except the one thing that mattered, the land title. That triggered a small delay in processing. Nothing major. Just enough for a junior lending officer to flag the missing file. The bank reached out. Griffin, arrogant and distracted, didn't respond. He assumed it was a clerical issue. Camille, meanwhile, had quietly begun working with Naomi again. Not to start a fight, not yet. But to confirm that her ownership was still valid, that no liens or transfers had occurred. It was. It hadn't. Legally, Griffin now lived in a home he owned, built on land he didn't. And without a lease, he was occupying that land without right. Camille could have acted immediately. She could have filed for eviction, sent notice to vacate, and made the local news in a matter of days. But she waited. There was something satisfying about watching him settle in, dig his heels deeper, show off what he thought was his kingdom. The more he posted, the quieter Camille became. Until the day Tessa came home with a crayon drawing. "This is Daddy's house," she said. "And that's Miss Riley. She said it's our real home now." Camille smiled, praised the drawing, and tucked it away in a drawer. But her heart stung not from jealousy, but injustice. That her daughter was being taught to forget what was real. That was the moment Camille made the call. Not to Griffin, not to Riley, but to the county recorder's office. Then the zoning board. Then her lawyer. Quietly, methodically, she began the process of reclaiming what was hers, not to hurt him, but to remind him that actions have consequences, and some foundations are not his to claim. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It was delivered by certified mail, addressed to Griffin Hale, with no return name on the envelope. Riley had been the one to answer the door. She handed it to Griffin with a playful, "Ooh, you're in trouble," unaware that the envelope in his hands was about to shift the ground beneath them, literally. Griffin didn't open it right away. He was late for a video call with a major client and tossed the envelope onto the granite kitchen counter next to a half-eaten protein bar. It wasn't until after lunch, when Riley was out and the house had gone quiet, that he peeled the seal open. Inside were just 2 pieces of paper. One was a formal letter written in precise legal language stating that the land currently occupied by Mr. Griffin Hale and Ms. Riley Voss remains the legal property of Ms. Camille Ellison, and that no tenancy agreement exists between the parties. The second document was a notice to vacate standard legal form, date stamped with 30 days' notice. Griffin blinked, reread it. His first instinct was laughter. Some kind of joke. Camille wasn't like this. She was the type to let things go, wasn't she? He tossed the papers onto the counter and poured himself a drink. Then he called his lawyer, and that's when the laughter stopped. The lawyer confirmed what Griffin had overlooked: the land deed was never transferred. In the flurry of refinancing and business restructuring, Griffin had assumed ownership of the home, equated to ownership of the land. But it didn't. Camille's name was still on file. The land was hers, and she had every right to reclaim it. "There must be something we can do," Griffin muttered. There wasn't. Not without Camille's cooperation. Not without a rental contract or a retroactive lease agreement. And Camille wasn't answering his calls. That night, Griffin stood in the backyard, staring at the lawn where he had hosted his victory party just weeks before. Riley came outside, barefoot and curious. "Everything okay?" "Just legal stuff," Griffin said, brushing it off. But Camille wasn't brushing anything off. From her apartment 2 towns over, she watched the tracking updates on the notice with quiet precision. Naomi had made sure it was airtight, backed by zoning ordinances, municipal codes, and a notarized chain of title. The law was on Camille's side. Griffin could fight it, delay it, spin it, but he couldn't undo it. Still, Camille wasn't after drama. She wasn't chasing headlines. She didn't even want the house back. She just wanted it acknowledged that he'd taken everything but forgotten the one thing he couldn't steal, where it all began. Griffin tried to push back. He had his lawyer send a request for discussion. Camille declined. Then he tried. Riley had her email from her account, something more personal, hoping to appeal to Camille's emotions. Camille didn't reply. In truth, she didn't feel anger. She felt alignment. For the first time in months, things were shifting back into place. Not because she forced them, but because gravity eventually pulls everything back to the truth. Meanwhile, the notice stirred rumors. Neighbors started asking questions. One noticed the city zoning vehicle parked outside. Another caught wind from the county clerk's office. Soon, whispers began. "Is he being sued? Doesn't he own this place? I thought the land was part of the deal." The cracks were no longer beneath the surface. They were showing. Griffin tried to stay calm, but Riley wasn't used to pressure. Her social media went dark for a few days. Then came the comments, questions from her followers about the sudden silence, the pulled sponsorship, the mysterious listing that showed the house marked pending legal dispute on a local real estate site. The illusion of power, once so carefully constructed, was beginning to flicker. And Camille, she remained silent, not out of cruelty but control. This was never about revenge. It was about restoration, about reclaiming what was hers, even if it was only on paper. Even if it came too late to save the garden, the curtains, the memories. Because some houses are built on stolen ground, and eventually someone comes knocking. Griffin Hale had always performed well in court. He wore confidence like a tailored suit, calm, composed, unfazed. During the divorce, he'd smirked through Camille's quiet testimony, leaned back while his lawyer twisted timelines, and winked when the judge ruled in his favor. The courtroom was just another boardroom to him. Controlled, contained. But this time felt different. He sat at the defendant's table, flipping through documents his lawyer had prepped, none of which offered a clean way out. Camille wasn't claiming emotional damages. She wasn't demanding financial compensation. She wasn't even suing for the house. She was enforcing property rights, cold, quiet, unshakable. The case was small in scope, but explosive in implication. The court wasn't packed, just a few reporters who'd sniffed out something juicy from zoning records, a legal intern from Naomi's office, and one older man who seemed fascinated by Griffin's shoes. Camille arrived precisely 5 minutes before the session began. She wore a deep gray coat, no makeup, and her hair tied back simply. No statement. No vengeance in her posture. Just presence. She looked calm, unreadable. It made Griffin shift in his seat. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Justice Marlene Beck, began by reviewing the facts. Camille Ellison held full legal title to parcel 3817C in Ashbourne County. The deed had remained uncontested and unchanged since her father's passing. The structure, a single-family home occupied by Griffin Hale, had been transferred in divorce proceedings, but the land itself had not. No formal lease agreement or land usage rights had ever been documented between the parties. Then came the question, was Griffin Hale knowingly or not occupying land he had no legal right to? Griffin's lawyer spun it hard, talked about oversight, intent to collaborate, and the shared marital history that blurred property lines. He tried to paint Camille as vindictive, using old wounds to strike back. But Camille didn't flinch. She didn't even speak. Naomi did all the talking. Clear. Direct. Every word backed with records. At one point, Griffin tried to interject. "She's doing this to destroy me," he said loudly. "This is personal." Justice Beck glanced up. "Mr. Hale, the court doesn't deal in emotional interpretation. Only facts, and so far Ms. Ellison has provided all of them." Griffin's jaw tightened. Naomi leaned over to Camille. "He's unraveling. Let him." The hearing moved quickly. No crossfire, no drama, just paper and law, which in this case was not on Griffin's side. When the judge called for a recess, Griffin stormed out into the hallway, Riley trailing behind. "You said she wouldn't do anything?" Riley hissed. "You told me it was all yours." "It is mine," Griffin snapped. She's bitter. This is her lashing out." Riley crossed her arms. "I don't want to live in a house sitting on someone else's land, Griffin." Inside the courtroom, Camille stayed seated, sipping water slowly. Naomi watched her client with quiet respect. "You don't have to stay for the final ruling," she offered. "I do," Camille said. "I need to hear it." 30 minutes later, the court reconvened. Justice Beck returned with her decision. The court finds that Mr. Griffin Hale is currently residing on land he does not legally own, lease, or have contractual access to. In accordance with state property law, the court grants the plaintiff's request for one of the following remedies to be enacted within 45 days: immediate vacating of the property and surrender of occupancy. Negotiated land lease with terms and back pay determined by the landowner. Structural removal of the dwelling at the defendant's expense. As Mr. Hale has made no attempt to reach formal agreement prior to this hearing, the court will default to remedy option 1, unless the plaintiff consents to option 2. The room was silent. Griffin turned to Camille, almost pleading. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, just fear. "Camille," he said quietly, "come on, we can talk about this. I'll pay you rent. I'll whatever you want." Camille stood. She didn't approach him. She didn't even look at Riley. Her voice, when it came, was calm. "I wanted peace. You wanted power. Now we both get to live with what we chose." She turned to the judge. "I'll accept option 2, with back pay starting from the date of divorce." Griffin's lawyer looked sick. Naomi smiled, just slightly. "That's generous," she murmured to Camille. Camille didn't smile. "It's fair." The gavel dropped. The decision was final. Griffin Hale had kept the house, but now he'd have to pay rent to his ex-wife just to stay inside it, and the price was only going up. Griffin Hale had faced many negotiations in his life, brand deals, client meltdowns, boardroom power plays, but none as humiliating as the moment he signed a lease agreement with his ex-wife. It arrived by courier 2 days after the hearing. A thick packet neatly stapled with Naomi Pierce's firm, printed in clean black letters across the top. The terms were simple: $4,800 per month in land rent backdated to the date of divorce. No grace period, no loopholes. A single late payment would trigger eviction procedures. Griffin skimmed it, eyes hardening at every clause. Riley hovered nearby, silent for once. "Can't we fight this?" she asked. "We already did," he muttered. In the weeks that followed, the mood inside the house shifted. What had once been a monument to Griffin's freedom now felt like a rented stage. He stopped inviting guests. Riley grew quiet, her Instagram posts fewer and filtered. The garden they'd tried to restore died out from neglect. The champagne fridge was never restocked. Each month Griffin sent Camille a check, and each month Camille cashed it without a word. She didn't gloat. She didn't post about it. She didn't even tell their mutual friends, though some found out anyway. The whispers grew in the grocery store at the school pickup line. People who once called Griffin a success story now spoke in lower tones. "He's living on her land, you know. She's got him paying rent just to stay in the house he stole. Poetic, isn't it?" Camille didn't respond to any of it. She spent her days editing grant proposals and helping at a local literacy nonprofit. Her weekends with Tessa became more peaceful. There were cinnamon mornings, bike rides, quiet drawings spread across their small kitchen table. She didn't need revenge to feel whole. She just needed room to breathe, and now she had it. But not everyone was so quiet. Riley, unable to tolerate the growing discomfort, left 6 weeks later. She packed without tears. No yelling, just a long exhale and a single sentence as she wheeled her suitcase through the door: "I didn't sign up for second place." Griffin didn't stop her. He sat on the edge of the bed that night in the same room Camille once designed, with soft lighting and woven curtains, staring at a wall he no longer recognized. The silence was heavier now, not peaceful like Camille's, but hollow. He considered selling the house, but that came with its own traps. The property without the land had depreciated in value. Most buyers wouldn't touch it. The few who did demanded that Camille sign a long-term lease agreement. She refused. Politely, consistently. The message was clear: the house is yours. The land stays mine. So he stayed, and he paid. The man who once bragged about getting everything was now locked into monthly reminders that he'd won the wrong thing. Camille, meanwhile, planted new seeds. She returned to the lot one afternoon, not to confront him, but to walk the perimeter. She didn't look toward the house. She didn't need to. Her feet remembered the edges. Her memory had already replaced the siding and windows with air and pine trees. She stopped beneath the oak tree she and her father had once built a swing on, long before Griffin had ever entered her world. The tree had aged, but it stood firm. Deeper than concrete, older than betrayal. She knelt beside its roots and buried a small metal box inside a copy of the deed, a photo of Tessa as a baby in Camille's arms, and a note that read, "Some things aren't meant to be owned, just honored." By winter, the house had gone quiet. Griffin no longer hosted dinners. No more fire pits crackling in the backyard. No more curated brunches with venture capital friends. He kept the curtains drawn most days, and the few lights that still flickered at night were dim yellow and tired. Inside, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It clung to the walls like moisture. He stopped opening the mail, stopped answering unknown calls. Every envelope with Camille's name in the corner made his jaw tighten. At first he resented her. Then he blamed her. Then eventually he realized she had done nothing but what was hers to do. It was the first honest thought he'd had in months. Meanwhile, Camille's life didn't become extraordinary, but it became her own. She never moved back to the land, never tried to reclaim the house. What she wanted wasn't bricks and beams. What she wanted was distance, and she had it. Tessa began spending more time with Camille. Not because of court orders or manipulations, but because children, even without words, sense peace. Camille never spoke ill of Griffin, but she never shielded him either. She let time draw its own lines. One afternoon, Tessa asked, "Why don't you live in the big house anymore, Mama?" Camille smiled gently. Because some places stop feeling like home, even if they still have walls. Tessa accepted that. Children are good with truth when it's soft enough to hold. Naomi occasionally checked in with updates. Griffin had tried half-heartedly to sell the property twice, but buyers backed out, unwilling to lease land they couldn't ever own. His mortgage was now a slow bleed. And yet he stayed. Pride, maybe, or inertia. Camille had stopped tracking it. She was focused elsewhere, starting small workshops for single mothers navigating legal systems, mentoring younger women on asset protection and financial independence. She didn't call it activism. She called it prevention. Once Naomi asked her over coffee, "Do you ever regret not taking back the house?" Camille stirred her drink, then looked out the window. "It was never the house I wanted. It was the life we promised each other inside it." That's what he broke. The house just became the echo. Naomi nodded, then smiled. And now, Camille returned the smile slower. "Now I just build somewhere quieter." Back at Griffin's time continued its erosion. He tried painting the walls again a lighter gray, tried swapping out the furniture, but nothing felt new. Because you can't repaint over shame. And you can't decorate over a foundation that doesn't belong to you. One night he stood barefoot on the porch, looking out at the trees beyond the lawn. He lit a cigarette he hadn't touched in years, and stared at the ground beneath him. He whispered aloud to no one. She never raised her voice. And that haunted him more than anything else.